Jamaica Plain's Hyde Square is known as a hotspot for political progressives. It might be the last place where you'd expect to see a billboard message discouraging abortion. It's one of many signs posted around the country, and it coincides with bills filed in several states to reduce the time period when abortions are allowed, possibly to 6 weeks into pregnancy. Our guest is the state representative for Hyde Square and other parts of Jamaica Plain, Mission Hill, Rosendale, and Brookline. We'd like to welcome Nika Elugardo. Thank you very much for being with us, Representative.
Thanks for having me back, Chris.
First of all, I think maybe we should sort of lay the ground here, talk about your own sense of where to go with this issue.
I think I've talked with the Women's Caucus and Mass Now, National Organization of Women, and others about thinking about intersectionalism and how important it is to incorporate the theological and religious views of women into our intersection of feminism. And that means talking about pro-choice in a way that women who believe that the fetus is a baby and alive and a person as young as conception also have access to abortion care, particularly when their communities of faith and their families are unsupportive or hostile. And so we really need a different language to address the particular concerns of those women.
One of the things that some people have taken issue with in this particular billboard is the message is that there is a heartbeat,
Right.
I think 18 days after conception, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, is that medically
Right.
the consensus out there at least?
Right. Well, I'm not a medical professional, but as an elected official, I can say I don't think the real issue there is the number of days. I think the people that are posting those billboards are trying to make a point that because they believe that, as I do, that life begins at conception, that means you shouldn't have an abortion. And what's really important, in my view, for people of faith who share that view, to recognize is that we cannot extend rights to the government to make those determinations for other women and to make determinations about their pregnancy. And so as pro-choice advocates and reproductive rights advocates, we have to, I think, not fall into a trap of conversation that is far from what the issue is really about. It's not about the argument, the philosophical argument about life. It's about the rights of a woman vis-a-vis the government and the rights of a government vis-a-vis all people, and the rights and responsibilities that the government does not have. And they have a responsibility to protect everyone's right to choose their medical care, including abortion care, regardless of what we may or may not believe about what's happening inside the woman's body. It is her body, and so she makes that determination.
Of course, when I see the 18 days, I'm thinking that's a time when a lot of women might not even realize they're pregnant. So by the time they do realize, they see that, it's almost like somebody's trying to shame them.
Right. Well, I have in my personal life and to a lesser degree in my professional life, before becoming an elected official, had both the honor and the challenge of supporting women making the decision, generally women of faith making the decision about whether to get an abortion or to pursue or to continue a pregnancy. And I can tell you, whether it's 18 or 30 days is not what they're thinking about. They're not thinking about, is the heartbeat going right now or not? They're factoring in a range of deeply personal and heart-wrenching issues, and I've supported women on both sides of that decision, all the way through both sides of that decision. And again, I really just think we can't allow the conversation to be clouded about scientifically suspect, proclamations about what's going on or not going on, because it's really not relevant to the issue of a woman's rights and needs in pregnancy.
One other thing, and this is about the word choice, because in plain English, it sounds like something that means a person has options. But when you talk about the kind of person and the kind of situation when a woman seeks to have an abortion or seriously considers it, it sounds like they're under duress a lot of the time. It's not like an easy choice.
Well, I think, again, there's a wide range of women that seek abortion care, a wide range of women that consider abortion, and they're coming from a lot of different backgrounds. There may be pressures that are on some of those women that aren't on other women. Poverty comes into play for some women, and for others it doesn't at all. And other factors, abuse, you name it. And so I think what's important is that the government doesn't intervene in that process of understanding those. It's a medical decision and a family and a personal decision. And we have to work really hard to make sure that women and girls of all ages have autonomy in making that decision.
This has been the news, and we're talking with State Representative Nika Elugardo. Representative, I want to ask you about a couple of things that you were campaigning last year on, and one of them is about a way to create more opportunities, at least for affordable housing, and this has to do with access to land for that. So explain what you're doing.
So I have a particularly geeky bill that I'm excited about, H3562, that has a hearing on Tuesday at 10 a.m. if anybody wants to come in and watch or listen. What the bill does is it says right now housing authorities have to file legislation, special legislation, to get access to surplus land that the state owns in order to develop affordable housing or to use it in furtherance of the development of affordable housing. So we streamline that process significantly, and a lot of the housing authorities are coming out to testify. They're excited about that. But importantly, we also extend that right to municipalities to gain access to state-owned land and state-owned property at nominal consideration, so free or near free, for the purposes of developing affordable housing. And that land can be anywhere in the state, so you might get that land to generate revenue somewhere else in the state that helps the local community there, but you share that revenue in order to build affordable housing in the eastern part of the state. The land might be in the western part. So it's a pretty exciting bill, and it also brings parity between big private developers who benefit from the bill, tenant organizations who, if they're well organized for increasing the development of affordable housing in their neighborhood, will also benefit from the bill. Community organizations, so we have groups like City Life, Vida Urbana coming out to testify. I think it's a win-win for a lot of folks, and it's a way to move away from looking at revenue as the only source of creating resources for affordable housing, and also making use of our other assets in the state. So I'm excited.
I don't want to have you pinpoint locations, but there
Sure.
has been so much building in Boston. Is there any place left where this might be of benefit?
Well, that's why it was so important for my district, which is parts of Boston and some of Brookline, to make sure that we weren't limiting ourselves to state-owned property inside of our municipal boundaries. We need to be able to make use of the state's assets anywhere. Our state tax dollars are not tied to our municipality. And so if we want to do a deal with a town out in the Berkshires, where we have a private developer that can't get access to land there, but we can give it to them for free to build a hotel that the town in the Berkshires would really love to have, provided that they give half of those revenues to, say, the Boston Housing Authority or the Brookline Housing Authority for further developing on land that they've already got, or land that's not state-owned land that they have trouble getting access to. This bill would enable that as well.
Another issue that's important in your district, and really the whole city and the state, is money for education reform.
Right. Right.
You hope we do better this year. Are we going to do that?
We are going to do better. So right now, there are several bills before the Education Committee, and the Education Promise Act, the bill that I've supported, provides.
That was mainly led by Senator Cheng Diaz, too, right?
Senator Cheng Diaz is absolutely on the Senate side, and Representatives Mary Keefe and Aaron Vega on the House side have provided some very strong leadership to building a bill that a lot of districts can get behind, and it provides for funding for, the foundation budget that we use in legislation, in Chapter 70 legislation, that determines how our state aid is allocated and how much state aid is allocated to the local districts. It's underfunding in 4 areas, so that includes special needs, that includes healthcare, that includes English language learning, and low-income districts. So those first 3 have been, rumor has it, in the building, basically agreed upon. And so from the several bills, there's a governor bill, there's a House bill, and then there's the Education Promise Act, all of which have some strong components for one or more of those pieces. So those 3 have been agreed upon. The low-income school districts, we need to really make sure that we're following the research recommendations to double weight the per student allocation in districts that have pervasive poverty. So the 10th decile, that means out of all 351 towns and cities, the 10% of those that have the highest rate of poverty. And so that's not just an individual kid that's struggling. Those are pervasive problems of housing poverty, often health issues, often joblessness, even homelessness, that the school has to deal with. And so they need about double what the typical student gets. And if we can make sure that that happens, and that it happens early, like by the beginning of the school year, sometime in September, we've settled that decision, and that's going to be a real win for the whole Commonwealth. And I think we're on track for that. So hopefully, we hope to get something. Many of us hope to see something out before the end of July. But with the budget being late and a lot of other legislation going through, it's been tricky to move other types of legislation right now. And so we're really asking folks to make sure that all of our legislators have their support as voters, and calling in to the committee to say, please make sure that we get that legislation passed to fully fund education, particularly low-income education, by the end of September. So that's really important.
One other issue that you worked on last year was the Safe Communities Act, which was to strengthen the restrictions on local cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. Do you see that advancing this year?
I do see some version of it advancing. I haven't heard a lot about what version of the Safe Communities Act might make it all the way through, but what I do know is that Speaker DeLeo says he's prioritizing passing some form of immigrant protection. And my colleague, who's also new to the House, Liz Miranda, has taken the lead alongside, I think, Ruth Balzer and others in the House, of making sure that those protections include everything that we need to keep our immigration safe from ICE intervention, and to keep our pocketbooks safe from funding the separation of families and the terrorizing of our immigrant neighbors.
Of course, we had one recent example in Boston where the police department ended up abetting federal enforcement without necessarily violating the city's own ordinance.
Right.
I guess, does that speak to a need for something from the state level?
Yeah, it does. And there's so many incidents that are unspoken, and people are afraid to go to school, people are afraid to walk into courts, people are afraid to report crimes. And so the state really needs to show support for our immigrant residents, and to say, we want you to feel safe, to fully participate in the communities that you're making stronger, and we're going to have your back on that.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
State Representative
It's always
Nika
nice.
Elugardo.